Episode 260, the most important page in the IEP that most parents forget to use. Well, hey, friend, welcome to the Not Your Average Autism Mom podcast. I am your host, Shannon Urquiola, and I am so glad you're here. Whether you are watching me on video or listening in like always, if we haven't met yet, I am the proud mom of two amazing young adults, and my son Jordan, who is 29, was diagnosed with autism when he was 5 years old. I have been walking this journey ever since, not just as a mom, but as his guardian and caregiver as he ventured into adulthood. And I created this podcast because I know how hard and lonely this road can feel. I've lived it, and I want to be that space where you can breathe and learn and realize that you are not alone. Every week, I share real life strategies and heartfelt encouragement and practical tools that have helped me and the moms I coach along the way. So, whether you are brand new to this journey or you've been here a while, like I have, I just want you to know that you belong here. And today we're talking about something that I actually cannot believe that in 259 episodes, I haven't done an entire episode on this topic before. And that is the parent input statement. One of the moms I work with, Heather, actually suggested this topic, and I love it because I have done so many special education episodes over the years, goals and accommodations and behavior plans and placement decisions. But I guess I've never slowed down and talked specifically about this one piece of the IEP. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you are walking into an IEP meeting without a written parent input statement, you're leaving one of your strongest advocacy tools sitting on your kitchen counter. And most parents don't even realize it. So today I'm going to break it down in detail. I'm going to talk about what it is, why it matters, what should go in it, what absolutely should not go in it, because listen, that's important too. And I'm going to give you real examples across academics, behavior, communication, executive functioning, social, anxiety, and transition. Because the truth is, this isn't fluff. Seriously, this is strategy. And some of you might not know, but I did advocacy for 10 years, special education advocacy, before I started Not Your Average Autism Mom. So I know the ins and outs of advocacy extensively. So let's talk about what the parent input statement really is. The parent input statement becomes part of the official IEP document. That means it is attached to the IEP. It becomes part of your child's education record. It is legally preserved. It cannot be paraphrased into something softer or shorter. And here's something many parents don't realize. When you speak in a meeting, your comments are often summarized in the notes. Summarized means interpreted. But when you submit a written parent input statement and ask that it be attached in its entirety, your words live exactly as you wrote them. And that matters, especially later on. Now, what this is not, let me just tell you, the parent input statement is not, event session, a complaint list, a place to attack a teacher or administrator, a recap of every frustration that you've had this year. You absolutely get to feel your frustration, but this document is strategic. It is calm. It is specific. It is intentional because we are painting a clear picture of your child. We're not trying to win an argument. And I promise you, calm, specific language carries way more weight than emotional language in an IEP document. So when you're writing this, I really recommend that you start with the strengths. Even if you're frustrated, I know sometimes when you're having a rough year, starting with strengths feels forced. Do it anyway. Not because we're pretending everything is fine, but because strengths drive good goals. So instead of writing, he struggles socially, you might write, Peter is highly observant and thrives in structured one on one interactions. He demonstrates strong visual learning skills and retains detailed information about topics of interest. Now, do you hear the difference? Because now the team knows, one, he learns visually. Two, he does well with structure. Three, he has a deep interest in certain areas. And all of that shapes the IEP. So, strengths might include strong memory, sense of humor, mechanical thinking, artistic ability, empathy, even if it's expressed differently, persistence, technology skills. If you don't name their strengths, the IEP may lean heavily towards deficits. And I'm just not okay with that. Our kids are more than their deficits. So when it comes to academic concerns, you have to be specific. This is where vagueness hurts you. So instead of he struggles with reading, you might write something like, he decodes at grade level but struggles with comprehension, particularly inferencing and summarizing. When asked to explain what he read, he becomes frustrated and he shuts down. So, what happens? Well, now you have a skill gap identified. You have observable behavior. You have impact on learning. Another example might be something like, instead of she hates writing, you could put something down like she has difficulty organizing her thoughts on paper. Multi-paragraph writing assignments often result in avoidance behaviors and incomplete work unless provided with structured graphic organizers and teacher check-ins. Do you see how that guides support? So you're not just describing the struggle, you're describing the pattern and where the success lies. Let's talk about communication. This is especially important for our non-speaking or really literal kids. This section is critical. So if your child scripts or uses AAC or is a Gestalt language processor or is highly literal or struggles to self-advocate, put it in writing. Peter uses spelling to communicate as a form of communication. When overwhelmed, he may repeat familiar phrases. This should be interpreted as a stress response rather than defiance. And here's the thing, that one sentence can completely change how the staff interpret the behavior. Another example might be something like, he doesn't independently request breaks even when he's dysregulated. He requires adult prompting to access supports. That now becomes a self-advocacy skill gap, and that can become a goal in the IEP. Next, let's move to sensory and regulation. Schools often minimize sensory because it's harder to measure. You don't minimize it. In your parent input statement, do not put he has sensory issues or she has sensory issues. Put, she is highly sensitive to noise and fluorescent lighting. In loud environments such as the cafeteria and assemblies, she covers her ears and attempts to leave. Access to noise canceling headphones, are in a predictable, quiet space can significantly improve regulation. Now, what have you done? You've identified the trigger, you've described the behavior, and you've named effective support. That is advocacy. That is what you were doing in those meetings. Now let's go to behavior, which is one of my favorites. And we're going to shift the lens because language matters here more than anywhere when you're talking about behavior. So instead of he refuses to do work, you might try something like when tasks feel overwhelming or unclear, he may shut down. He might put his head down or avoid engagement. This typically occurs during multi-step assignments or unstructured transitions. Well, what did we do? We just shifted defiance to overwhelm, refusal to skill gap. And that changes intervention. So let's say your child has meltdowns. Document the patterns. When routine changes unexpectedly, he becomes dysregulated and he may cry or yell for 20 or 30 minutes, resulting in missed instructional time. Guess what? Now it's measurable. Now it's documented. Now it requires planning. All right. I want to move to one that gets missed a lot, and that is executive functioning. Look, many of our children look capable, but they often can't start tasks or organize materials or manage time or plan ahead. So I'm telling you, write it. He struggles with task initiation and requires verbal prompting to begin independent work. Without visual checklists and structured supports, assignments are frequently incomplete. And guess what that does? That leads to organizational accommodations, visual schedules, reduced workload. Executive functioning goals, if it's not written, it doesn't get addressed. And that's so important, and that's why it's missed so often. The next one is let's talk about peer interaction and social skills. This one is emotional for many of us. I get that. We want to write, he doesn't have any friends. Well, instead, you might want to write something like, he expresses a desire for peer connection, but struggles with reciprocal conversation. He may monologue about preferred topics and has difficulty interpreting social cues. Well, guess what? Now the team sees that he has a desire, that there is a skill gap, that there's a specific challenge that can lead to pragmatic language services, social goals, structured peer groups. Now, the next one is mental health and anxiety. Do not leave this out. If your child dreads school, has Sunday night anxiety, complains of stomach aches, avoids presentations, put it in writing. He exhibits increased anxiety before major assignments and has verbalized fear of making mistakes. This anxiety impacts participation and willingness to attempt new tasks. Now, the school cannot say we weren't aware because you've made them aware. This is part of his IEP and his educational folder. So it's there. The next thing I want to talk about is for kids that are 14 and older, transition planning. If your child is in middle or high school, this section is huge. You want to make sure that you write about independent living skills, vocational interests, safety awareness, community skills, financial literacy. All of that is important in transition. You could say something like, he demonstrates a strong interest in technology and mechanical systems. However, he requires continued instruction in independent living skills, including money management, time awareness, and workplace communication. Transition plans should always reflect real life. And your parent input statement pushes that. Now, I want to talk about some things to not include. These are really important. Do not include, attacks on teachers or staff, threatening language, legal warnings, emotional outbursts, comparisons to other children. It's important that you keep your parent input statement calm, specific, professional, because remember, strategy wins here. Now, I have a lot of people ask me, when do I send it? I always recommend that you email it 3 to 5 days before your scheduled meeting. And it's important that you write this sentence when you send it. Please attach this parent input statement to the IEP document in its entirety. Those words matter. And then bring copies to the meeting. Look, I always walked into my meetings with copies for everyone that was going to be there. And when you do that, watch how different the conversation feels when you've already set the tone. And I want to tell you why it protects you later. Because if services are reduced or placement changes or supports aren't implemented or behavior escalates, your documented concerns are already on record. You saw it, you named it, and you asked for support. And all of that matters. You are the only person in that meeting who has known your child their entire life. Teachers rotate, therapists change, administrators move on. You don't. Your parent input statement is your opportunity to make sure that your child is fully seen as you see them. They are not just a test score. They're not just a behavioral chart, but as a whole human being. And this is also where, I want to say something that might be uncomfortable, but it's important. There is immense value in working with an advocate. Over the years, and even now, where I only work one-on-one with a small handful of families, but I have sat in enough IEP meetings to tell you this with confidence. There are so many families who don't even realize their child could be getting more support than they're currently receiving. And that's not a knock on the family. That is not failure. It's simply this: you don't know what you don't know. Special education is its own language. It has its own rules and timelines and procedures and strategy. And unless you live in it every day, how would you know? It's like taxes. I'm not doing my own taxes. Why? Because I don't know tax law. I don't know the loopholes. I don't know what I'm missing. I'm not willing to risk it when it impacts my finances. Special education advocacy is no different, except this time we're talking about your child's education, their services, their future. And then there's the emotional side. And let's be honest, sitting at an IEP table surrounded by people with degrees and initials after their names can sometimes feel intimidating. Psychologist, BCBA, SLP, OT, special ed director. It's a lot. And most parents walk in thinking, well, they must know what's best. And sometimes they do. But sometimes they're looking at budget or staffing or district policy or what's easiest. An advocate walks in looking at one thing: your child. We've sat in hundreds of IEP meetings. We can read a room. We know when something is being said for legal protection versus educational benefit. We know when to pause, when to push, when to ask for data, when to request evaluations, when to slow the process down. We know how to get to the result that you're actually hoping for. So, hiring an advocate is not being difficult. It's not being dramatic. It's investing in your child's education and future. And for many families, it is absolutely worth it because once you understand what is possible, you realize how much you didn't even know to ask for. And I also want to say something else that matters just as much as hiring an advocate. Personality matters. You need to click with your advocate. You need to feel comfortable enough to tell them the whole truth, the messy truth, the parts that you're embarrassed about, the parts that you're unsure of, the things you're afraid to say out loud in a meeting. If you feel hesitant with your advocate, that's a problem. You are trusting this person to help represent your child. That requires honesty. That requires comfort. That requires trust. And I've also worked alongside some very strong personality advocates over the years, the kind who come into a meeting hot and adversarial and combative. I want to say an advocate does not have to be harsh to be effective. In fact, my opinion, when things get overly aggressive, it can sometimes work in the opposite direction for the family. Because at the end of the day, every single person at that IEP table should be working towards the same goal, setting your child up for success. And don't get me wrong. Yes, there are times to push. Yes, there are times that we as advocates stand firm. Yes, there are times to say, no, that's not appropriate. But it can be done with clarity and strategy and professionalism. If your first advocate doesn't feel like the right fit, that is okay. You are not required to keep someone just because you hired them. Talk to another advocate, schedule a Zoom call, talk to 5 of them if you have to. This is your child's education. You deserve a great working relationship. And if you're searching for an advocate and don't even know where to start, you can always email us at the email address in the show notes. We keep a list of qualified advocates and we're always happy to share that contact information. You don't have to figure this out alone. And you don't have to settle either. All right, my friends, I hope this episode has been helpful and maybe you learned something today at just the right time. So, thank you so much for spending part of your day with me. Whether you watched today's episode or listened in, like always, I'm so grateful you're here. And listen, if you're tired of trying to figure this out all on your own, if you're feeling overwhelmed or exhausted, or maybe you're just craving real connection with other moms who get it, I want to personally invite you to head over to our website, notyouraverageautismmom.com, and check out the ways that we can help you beyond just a weekly podcast. My recent reset training is available now, and it is 2.5 hours of coaching where I go in deep to help you feel better. You know, we're over here rewriting the story of autism parenting, and there's a place for you in it. So until next week, take a deep breath, hold your head high, and above all, remember, you, mama, are doing amazing at this mom thing.